South Africa has one of the world's highest rates of unemployment in the world, with concerns raised over the youth unemployment. The presidential employment stimulus has created over 1 million work opportunities, but some advocacy organizations believe more can be done to reduce joblessness. Let's discuss this further now. I am joined by Crystal Duncan-Williams, project lead at Youth Capital. Crystal, thank you so much for joining us on Newzroom Afrika this afternoon. Now, why are you hosting these sessions ahead of the national elections?
Thanks so much, Masa. So we know from our conversations with young people that many young people are disillusioned with the government. Many people are saying they don't want to vote because they don't see that any of the political parties represent them. And so in the lead up to elections, we are hosting these yes or no sessions, as we're calling them, where we invite political parties who either have seats in parliament or look like they're likely to get seats in parliament post this national election, where we can have short conversations, including the voice of a young person, asking them, what will you do for me as a young person? Why should we as young people even bother to vote for you? We hosted the first session this morning, but this will just be the first in a series. And we really got lots of questions from young people already, asking questions that we would expect. Are these just empty promises? We've heard them before. We've heard this speech before. How will things be different after the elections if we give you our vote? So these are just some of the things that young people are raising.
And also, Crystal, we heard from the IEC yesterday after this weekend's final voter registration drive that they received, historic numbers of people coming through to register to vote, but particularly those numbers were majority of the youth. It was 70%, I think, of this weekend's people who went to go register to vote were members of the youth. What is that telling us when we're looking at the history of it, that there seem to be this disinterest, and also from the conversations that you've been having with this yes or no campaign?
So I think it's really encouraging for us at Youth Capital to hear that young people are registering to vote. We know both locally and nationally that there is this feeling amongst young people that the government doesn't do anything for them. And so they're rather going to just do their own thing in their communities. But at the end of the day, we do live in a democracy. Who sits in the seats of power really determines whether you have water coming through on your taps, you have basic service delivery in your community. And so it really is important that you make your mark. There are over 21 million young people between the ages of 15 and 34 in this country. They could sway the election one way or the other. Given that many of them have abstained from voting in the past. I think it makes for a very interesting election that young people are stepping forward. I think it's also important for young people to hold leaders accountable post-election, to say, we gave you our vote because you promised to do X, Y, and Z. Are you delivering on those promises? And we really hope through these conversations that we're hosting that we can have more of these kinds of engagements with political parties, asking the hard questions, and that young people feel like they can hold political leaders to account once they've given them their vote. And that it just doesn't end, at the voting stations, but actually we continue to build a stronger democracy through accountability post-elections.
And young people are certainly feeling that brunt of this worsening economy as well. When we look at the unemployment stats as well, and the number of people who are comprised in the youth who are unable to get work as well. Do you find that as societal issues more and more impact directly on the youth, that there's a correlation with them then being more interested, and the youth being more interested in the politics to directly try and change their circumstances?
I think that through social media, young people feel like they have more of a voice, which maybe historically in the past they haven't. Political affiliations or feelings around policy and governance are, coming through really strongly on social media channels. So I think that's what's really drawing young people in. I think young people in this country have been disenfranchised and marginalized for a long time. The youth unemployment rate has been consistently high. So I don't think that's a new development, but perhaps young people are realizing the power that they have. And we hope that by giving them a platform at Youth Capital that they can continue to unlock that power and harness that power. It was interesting on our conversation this morning, young people were saying, well, the representation from the political parties is all old people, Youth Capital is a youth-centered organization. We are the youth representatives. And unfortunately, as an example, the ANC Youth League had committed to join us on the panel this morning, and the person person didn't show up. So I think this is, young people posing the hard questions to say, I want to see people like me in parliament. I want to see people like me represent me, people who understand my challenges. Because it's often, I think, young people feel when they listen to political leaders that they are so far removed from the realities that young people face in 2024. And so I think as young people begin to feel that they can make a noise about this and raise their concerns and their issues, they will continue to engage more actively in political processes.
We're also seeing more and more political parties being established. Of course, also the introduction of independent candidates being also allowed to participate in these upcoming elections as well. With these new entrants coming to the fore, is it enticing young people from the engagements that you've had with them?
I think there's a bit of a novelty factor. I think many of us, myself included, have felt for a long time, well, these are political choices, and actually none of them seem like a good option for me. And so I do think that adding more candidates into the pool is making things more exciting for young people. On the flip side, it does kind of muddy the waters a bit. You now have, instead of 5 choices, you've got 100.
You're spoiled for choice.
Exactly. And this can really, if you have too much choice, that can also be quite confusing. And so I think it's really important in our role as civil society and our role as advocates to give young people information that they can make an informed choice at the voting station. That's really what we're trying to do with these conversations. And we invite, political parties to take part, because let's be honest, you have hundreds of pages in your manifesto. Young people are not going to read hundreds of pages in your manifesto. And so these kinds of platforms where we can have a short engagement on a particular issue that's relevant to young people is, I think, really the way you're going to get your political viewpoints and your policy viewpoints across to young people.
And as we've been talking about this, youth unemployment, huge thorn in their foot as well. Ahead of SONA and the elections, all eyes are on the presidential employment stimulus and the allocation of funds to public employment. What are the political parties' views on this public employment?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Masa. I think the biggest surprise for me from this morning's conversation, where we had the DA, the ACDP, the Patriotic Alliance, Freedom Front Plus, and Rise Mzansi, those are the parties represented on our discussion this morning. And I think my takeaway was many of these parties are saying we need to do away with public employment programs because they're short-term opportunities and they don't lead to jobs, so it's a waste of money. And I don't think they're alone in that viewpoint. What we at Youth Capital are saying is that that is not true. It might have been true of some of the expanded public works programs, EPWP, CWP. We're not saying that historically there aren't problems with these programs. But when you look at PES, when you look at the presidential employment stimulus, I just heard research earlier this afternoon that shows that money put into the pockets of young people as teachers' assistants is going back into the local economies. They're spending it at their retailers, at grocery stores, and those grocery stores are then creating more employment because they have more demand. At the same time, we know that the literacy outcomes, there have been a few studies that have been done to show serious gains in reading amongst grade 1 to grade 3 learners where teaching assistants are present. And so you're really getting double bang for your buck through these public employment programs. They must continue to be funded. The scale at which they've been rolled out, the impact that they've had for young people as well as learners is just uncontested. The research that's coming out is all positive. And so I think we really need to flip the narrative that public employment programs are not a handout. They're a stepping stone. They're part of a basket of solutions to tackle youth unemployment. And they're a key piece of a youth unemployment strategy in the context of South Africa in 2024.
And as Youth Capital, Crystal, you have, as an organisation, been quite vocal about advocating for the extension of these funds. And last year it was, I think you got 16,000 signatures for that petition. What has been the feedback? Will there be an extension?
So glad you raised that, Masa. We're currently sitting on close to 23,000 signatures. So we're still pushing the petition because in the medium-term budget speech, there was the announcement there would be continued funding contingent on taking money away from EPWP and CWP. So obviously there's been a lot of kind of back and forth because we don't want to cut programs randomly just for the sake of funding other programs. These programs should all work in complement with one another. So currently where it stands is it looks like there will be some funding. The size of the funding we still are not sure of. We're hoping to find out in the next few weeks. I'm sure that the budget on the 21st of February will make that clear. But we will continue to push for longer term funding, more secure funding, because otherwise what happens is we spend all our energy advocating for funding when we could be putting that energy into M&E to prove the impact of the program and to scale it and improve it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for those engagements with the youth. All the best to you. That was Kirsten Duncan Williams, the project lead at Youth Capital.